This is a story that happened a couple of years ago when I was 20 years old. I had a friend named Liam who was celebrating his birthday at a nightclub downtown. It was pretty exciting as he was turning 20 himself, which was the legal drinking age from where I resided. I remember wisely taking an Uber as opposed to driving down there myself, just in case I wanted to get hammered. Turning legal age where I was from always gave a reason to go over the top with the drinking, so taking an Uber was completely justifiable. When I eventually got inside the club, I could recall dancing with multiple females while hammering down countless drinks. Again, it was my friend Liam's birthday, so we usually hosted these extravagant events by getting a booth along with bottle service. "Hey dude, are you having a good time?" "Yes, sir." "I bet you're checking out that blonde at the bar, huh?" "Come on, man. Why don't you mind your own beeswax, birthday boy? You like them thick, don't you?" "Oh, you know what else is sick?" "What?" "My vomit." I remember not feeling as intoxicated after puking in the bathroom stall, but that didn't stop me from throwing in the towel and calling it a night. I can recall heading out of the club and calling an Uber, as I knew my chances of picking up a female were slim to none considering I had regurgitated ramen breath. I ultimately purchased an Uber pool, which was when multiple riders heading in the same direction as you could also share a ride. I particularly didn't like sharing rides with strangers, but seeing as how cheap the Uber pool was in comparison to the regular Uber, I thought I'd give it a try. I wasn't exactly the wealthiest guy at the time, just an average college student who was broke and lived off eating noodle packs to help make ends meet. About 5 minutes later, my Uber finally arrived curbside near the club. As I approached the Uber, I nonchalantly hopped in the back of the vehicle as I could see the front passenger seat being occupied by another male. I remember seeing the male passed out drunk, as I assumed he had consumed a large amount of alcohol considering we were in the club district of the city. As the Uber driver began to drive towards our destinations, I kindly introduced myself by saying, "Hey there, long night ain't it?" "Yep, I'm kind of used to it." "What's wrong with him?" "He's just drunk as a skunk, just like the majority of you kids I pick up." "Yeah, well, you only live once, you know." The driver acknowledged my statement by nodding his head as he proceeded to carry on with the ride ahead. I remember briefly being in and out of consciousness as I knew the ride was going to take a little longer than usual due to the ride being an Uber pool. I kindly requested the Uber driver to play some music in his car by saying, "Excuse me, sir, do you have an AUX cord I can use to play my music?" "I thought you said you only live once." "No, yeah." "Well, enjoy your life while you're still here, kid." I confusingly respond, "What do you mean? Don't you just enjoy looking at nature?" I then looked outside and realized that he was taking us through a secluded rural area where it was nothing but crop fields and land. That's when my sobering reality set in as I realized he had completely driven off route from the requested destination. Sir, where are we going? Can I ask you a question?" Sure." "Why did you get inside my car?" "Because you're my Uber driver." "And why did you assume that I'm your Uber driver?" "Because you picked me up." That's when I checked the Uber app and noticed something so disturbing it still raises the hairs on the back of my neck just thinking about it. The profile picture of the driver was the same man passed out on the passenger seat. As I casually glanced at the passenger, I could see a trickle of blood dripping down from his mouth. That's when the driver looked at me through the rearview mirror and said, "I'm not an Uber driver, kid." "Then who the hell are you?" "You're gonna wish you never lived from the torture I'm gonna put you through." That's when I opened the door and immediately jumped out onto the side of the dirt road. As the man abruptly stopped the vehicle, I knew I had fractured my rib cage, but through sheer adrenaline, I had picked myself up and ran deep into the middle of a nearby cornfield. I remember running for about 5 minutes or so until I was a good couple of yards away from the vehicle. That's when I heard the man yelling from afar, saying, "Come back, kid. I'm not gonna hurt you, it was just a joke." I remained silent and crouched down the entire time as I dialed 911 on my cell phone. I remember whispering my location to the operator while simultaneously using the Google Map feature. What was 15 minutes felt like 15 hours as I saw several police units show up at the disclosed location. I ultimately ended up filing a police report and getting dropped off at my house by one of the officers. As far as the so-called Uber driver, he was unfortunately not found as the vehicle was located near a forest preserve about a mile away from where the cornfield was. The man in the passenger seat was, in fact, the real Uber driver. He was unfortunately pronounced dead at the scene. I still don't know what the man planned to do with me that night. All I can speculate is that the man was severely ill in the head and needs to get some sort of professional help. I now don't drink nor do I take any form of public transportation when I go out, as the fear of encountering that man still triggers me to this day. Inking about money at this point. He is a former Uber driver. I've dealt with a whole bunch of unpleasant characters, from the drunken groups of friends on Saturday nights to the people who pretend to be handicapped to get free rides. But every so often, you may pick up somebody who can just be classified as a straight-up creep. I've picked up a few of these guys, but never one quite as bad as a guy named Ben. It was a Friday night in December, one of the coldest nights of the year. I had nothing to do, so I figured I'd do some late-night pickups. This was 2 years ago. I was 18 and had a new Honda Accord. My parents kind of spoiled me a bit. I was a very skinny 18-year-old, though, and that's why my dad told me to always keep a blade in my car, because you never know what kind of nuts are getting into the car. A guy named Ben popped up a couple of miles away by a major shopping area. I responded to his request and started driving in that direction. I pulled up in front of the shopping center where I saw a group of teenagers hanging out. It looked like trouble. I hoped this Ben guy wasn't part of this group. A bunch of them looked at me and my car as I slowly passed. Eventually, I just hit the gas and went further into the parking lot of the shopping center, wanting to get away from this group. I did 2 laps around the whole parking lot until I finally noticed through my left mirror somebody approaching my car from behind. I rolled down my window and called out, "Ben." He called back, "Yes." I told him to hop in. I had to repeat myself 3 times, and given that all I was saying was "hop in," very clearly made the situation very weird from the start. The 4th time he finally understood me and walked slowly around the back, getting into the seat right behind me. Usually, the people I picked up would sit diagonally from me, which is what I preferred. When people sat right behind me, it just made me a little paranoid sometimes, especially when the person seemed kind of creepy. This guy was old. He had to be in his upper 40s. When I asked him his age, he told me he was 46, which I entered into my phone. By his voice, I could tell he was a very heavy smoker. Come to think of it, my car was starting to smell like cigarettes. The address he gave me was 10 miles away, which was fine since that meant I'd be making more money. I tried making small talk initially, which didn't work out too well. If I would ask him a yes or no question, sometimes he'd just mumble, and any other questions led to dry responses. I stopped talking when he completely ignored one of my questions. There were still 5 miles to go. By the 6-mile mark, things started getting uneasy. I was afraid to look into the rearview mirror because I was so sure that he was staring at me. I took a quick half-second glance, and I was right. He was, in fact, staring at me. My body forced my foot down heavier on the gas. I wanted this ride to be over sooner. By the 8-mile mark, I started to realize we were in the middle of nowhere. We were on basically a deserted street with woods on either side and occasional buildings. I was growing suspicious now as to where this address he told me actually was, so while driving, I dragged my finger across my phone to slide the map in the direction of the address. It seemed to lead to a dead-end street with no surrounding streets nearby. I was getting more and more nervous with each passing minute. I shot a glance back up again at the mirror, and he was still watching me. I finally summoned up the courage to ask him if the address he gave me was of his house. There was silence for a few moments, and I thought he was once again going to ignore me or possibly didn't hear me. But 5 seconds later, he finally answered, yes. There was less than a mile left in the drive now, still surrounded by nothing but woods with the occasional empty-looking building. I was approaching the dead-end street that the address he gave me resided on, hoping some houses would come into sight. As the street came up, I slowed down so I could get a good look at it, but nothing could be seen, just pitch blackness. I could only imagine why he wanted to get me out here alone, so far away from anybody or anything. I casually kept driving, pretending like I missed it, hoping he wouldn't notice. But he did. Instantly, he hopped out of his seat and yelled at me to turn around. Honestly, I felt like my life was on the line, so I apologized and did a quick 3-point turn. As I was repositioning, I flicked a blade open and held it tight in my right hand, ready to use it. I turned down the dead-end road, with my headlights now displaying just what I thought I would see, nothing but trees on either side. I made it to the end of the road, not a single house or building. I just knew something was about to go down. I was just trying to physically and mentally prepare myself for it. Suddenly, he said in as soft a voice as he probably could, "Thanks for the ride." I wasn't even opened his door, but before stepping out, he said, "Could you get out of the car for a second? I need help carrying my bag. I have a bad back." But he didn't have a bag. I knew he didn't. He didn't come in with one. I replied, yeah, sure. Let yourself out and I'll help you in a sec." The shakiness in my voice was too obvious. What happened next I never imagined would happen. All of a sudden, I felt pressure on my neck. It took me at least a second before I could realize he was choking me from the back seat. Immediately, I drilled the blade into his left arm, and he screamed in pain, releasing his grip on my neck. He fell out of the car and onto the street, and I took that opportunity to turn the car around and practically floor it down the street until I returned to a busy road. I actually didn't end up calling the cops. I was just too scared to do anything but drive home, and by the time I got home, I just wanted to go to sleep and forget about it. Needless to say, I resigned from my Uber driving days after this incident. I'm an 18-year-old girl living in Baltimore, Maryland. For those who don't know, Baltimore hasn't always been the nicest of places to live, though I've mostly gotten along just fine. And luckily, I no longer live in the city, just right outside of it. You can still expect, though, that I was raised to be hyper-aware of my surroundings and very wary of strangers. At this time, my school would just let me out for spring break and we got the announcement for an extended break. At that time, I didn't drive, and neither my sister nor my parents could pick me up. With all my friends now living near me, I really had no choice but to Uber home. I wasn't new to Ubering to and from school. I've actually always had pretty good experiences with Uber up until this point. Either I get the usual quiet, relaxing kind, or I get some really friendly people with interesting conversations. On the day when my driver picked me up, at first it was perfectly fine. We made some polite conversation and we actually were getting along just fine. Now keep in mind there were only 2 more common routes to take me back to my home. Both routes only took about 15 minutes and all included very few main roads and mostly back roads. I also have a habit of looking at my Uber driver's phone whenever it's in that little phone holder. As soon as this guy started going off the suggested route, I became immediately more alert. I continued to converse with this guy, acting like I didn't notice a thing, still glancing at the GPS on his phone the entire time he was off route. Then he pulled onto the highway. Then I got quiet. It wasn't like the conversation just died down naturally. He just stopped answering me. I immediately became nervous. The guy wasn't taking me anywhere near my home. He was actually going down freeways that would have taken me into a whole different state. I immediately texted my friend group chat with what was happening, showing them the guy's profile and everything, texting them that if I don't respond within an hour to any of them to call the police. I was way too scared to press the safety button on my phone because I knew it wasn't uncommon for Uber drivers to purposely take super long routes to get more money. Still, I gathered up all my courage and I spoke up to him, letting him know that I was suspicious of him. "Excuse me, I'm sorry, but is this the right way? All the times I've Ubered, I've never been taken on the highway before," I said to him. Pretty much immediately, he started to reassure me that I was safe and he was taking a quicker route. Yeah, right. As I mentioned before, a normal trip home would have only taken about 15 minutes, maybe even less. I was in the car for nearly half an hour now. Then I tried to call my dad. He didn't answer. So what I did instead was give an Oscar award-winning fake phone call. "Hey Dad, yeah, I'm on the highway right now. Yeah, my location is shared with you." "Why?" "Okay, yep, I will. I'll talk to you when I get home. Bye, love you too." My Uber driver was staring at me for the duration of that entire fake phone call. I hoped if he thought my dad knew where I was and that he was expecting me to come home, he would hopefully not have any ill intentions with me. Right then, suddenly, my driver turned into a highway exit, and within another 20 minutes, I was on my main road home that I don't think I've ever gotten out of any car so fast in my life. Still, though, my dumbass still gave him a decent rating and a tip. I guess because at the time, I truly didn't know if he had any ill intentions with me. I mean, it's very unlikely that he could have just been another Uber driver trying to make an extra buck. And that he did. I nearly got charged $20 more for what I usually pay for my ride I usually had to pay on that trip. I still wish that I'd emailed some kind of Uber customer service or something and explained the situation. Needless to say, please stay safe out there when Ubering, guys. If your driver ever goes off route for an extended period of time for no apparent reason, make it known that you're aware of it and that you're onto them. It could just very much possibly save your life. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.